Okay, at this point I'm going to test to make sure I have a functional coil. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my Strobo Spark tester, coil tester. This particular unit is made by Fun Projects in Illinois. John Reagan's the man that makes it. It's an excellent product. The price on these is around $350, and the nice thing about the Strobo Spark is they're available. About anybody that wants one can have one. You can use the venerable hand crank coil tester to do the same thing that we're going to do here, but I like these because they're available, and it does a couple other functions that the hand crank coil tester doesn't do. We've got our capacitor installed in this coil. We haven't put the side back on yet or anything. I just want to test a couple of things on this coil now that we've got some points on it. First of all, we're going to leave the points open. I'm going to just hold my thumb on it, and we're going to test that capacitor that we just installed to make sure that we have a good capacitor value. These were some of the same tests that we ran. Got a scale on here that we can read to see that what's going on. This also acts just like your Model T Ford magneto. It has it makes an alternating current that makes the coil act just as if it was in the car. But the first thing we're going to do is we're going to test our new capacitor to make sure that the capacitor value is good. And as you can see on this scale, it could read about 0.47 microfarads. And we'll just open the points on this side. I just hold my thumb on the bottom point, separate it from the top point, set our capacitor our tester to capacitor value, and do a check. And you can see that it's in that little green window. He makes it real easy to check. It's in the green window. It shows that our capacitor value on our new capacitor is in good shape. The next thing that we're going to test is to make sure that we don't have any capacitor leakage with this new capacitor. We shouldn't. It's a brand new capacitor, but believe it or not, I have found capacitors that have had some leakage even being brand new. So we're going to test that. And the bottom green window on this scale, you're going to see that the needle will charge, should stay within that green window or maybe a little above, and then it'll drop back down to infinity, showing that the capacitor has no leakage. And you can see that it just jumps up and back down, stays within that green window. So we've installed a good capacitor on this coil. The next thing that we're going to test, and we don't have anything adjusted yet, but I do want to check to make sure that we're going to have a little bit of spark coming out of our spark plug on this coil. The problem that we can have with a Model T coil is we can go to the trouble of putting all new points and capacitors in and get to a point where the secondary windings in the coil have an open that actually pass this test but will fail a spark test. And one of the things that we saw on our sheet a little while ago is the problem that you can have is the coil buzzes but there's no spark, and what is happening is that spark, there is a spark, but it's going to ground within the coil itself. So it's a coil that we can't use. So we're going to test that on this coil. We're going to set our Strobo Spark to read coil amperage. We've gone ahead and closed the points. We can actually adjust our magneto on this thing so that you have a weaker magneto or a medium magneto or a very strong magneto. I always test them at medium. I figure most cars are probably medium, so I just go ahead and set my tester to read medium. And we've got the coil installed, and now all we got to do is see if we've got some spark going on here. Now there won't be anything adjusted. I hear some spark, but I don't see anything, but I'm a little weak on my amperage. We're going to take that out. We're going to apply a little bit more amperage right here. By bending that tail on that spring, it makes it harder to pull down, which uses more amperage to pull it down. Okay. Well, what we've done now is we found a coil. We've actually set it up. It's sparking, but it's not sparking inside. So we've actually found a Model T Ford coil that has an open in the secondary, and this coil passed all of our other tests as we went to rebuild it, but it's not going to be a usable coil. So we're going to have to move on to the next coil, and the reason that this is the exact reason why I didn't solder in that capacitor. As you see here, we've got a wire coming out of our secondary coil unit going to our bottom contact, another wire coming out of this secondary coil and going to the contact, and there is continuity between the two. You got a wire here that connects them. There is continuity between the two, but what has happened, these are really fine horsehair wires that are twisted on here, and at some point somebody has probably applied power to this coil with nowhere for the spark to go. And so electricity will always choose the path of least resistance, and it's going to find a place to go. And so it's created a short, or created an open in the secondary winding, and in so doing it has probably created a carbon path within that winding, and so our spark is going to ground inside the coil box, but when we do a continuity check, because there's a coil path or a carbon path, we still get continuity through the coil. Getting ready to test a coil again. We've just removed the capacitor that we just installed in the one that didn't work. We've put it into another coil. This happens to be the one that I took apart that we didn't take the side off. So we can see that that capacitor fits down in there nicely. We've made the same physical connections that we did on the other coil. We've installed our points, and now we're ready to run the tests in the strobo spark to make sure that everything's solid before we go ahead and solder everything. We've installed our coil into our strobo spark. We've set it to read coil amperage, and we're going to go ahead and give it a test here. We're going to look into the scope and see if we have some sparks. Most of the time we have to make some adjustments on it for amperage, but this one's pretty well adjusted. It's showing 1.5 amps, and at the same time we're seeing 3 individual sparks on the strobo sparks, showing us that we have a good coil. It's making a pretty decent spark. I am seeing occasionally though a double spark on this coil, and that's an adjustment we can make on the cushion spring and the points. We're going to look at this sparking again. We're seeing a few little double sparks. They're not consistently double sparks, but they are double sparks. And the other problem that we're seeing is we're seeing a little fluctuation with the needle on our amperage, and that has to do with the tension on the upper points as well. So we're going to make some adjustments in that and see what we got after we've made some adjustments. We've checked our coil in our strobo spark tester. We found that it's good. It's creating a good spark. Need to do some final adjustments on it later, but we know we can work with it. So I'm going to go ahead and solder our connections up. We twisted those wires together. The first one's, because the sides on this is a little more difficult to get to, but I'm just going to go ahead and heat that up, stick my soldering iron in there, and I'm going to add a little solder to those twisted wires. Making a good solid connection. I'm going to do the same thing up here. We'll just run some solder over that twist. Stick these wires down inside the coil so that they don't have a chance of contacting with each other, because you don't want one side touching the other. You push this side down, get it out of the way. And now we're to the point where we can go ahead and repot this with tar. We're not ready to repot the tar in our coil, and what I use here is I actually saved the tar that we've taken out of the original coils and I put it in here, but it seems like we're always a little short. So I just go to my local roofing supply company and I bought a keg of, it comes in a 50-pound keg of grade 3 roofing steep, and it's got a pretty high flash point on it, probably about 400 degrees, so it's not going to be melting in your coil box. What we're doing here is we're melting the tar, getting ready to pour. It's kind of a smelly process, so don't use your wife's good pot. Don't use your stove in the house. I've made that mistake, and you can really get put in a doghouse over that for a long time, because the smell doesn't go away for a long time. So we're melting this tar in a pot that I went to a garage sale and found, and I bent it a little bit, put in a little shape here, got a little V to it, and I found the hot plate at the same garage sale. I gave $1 for the hot plate and 50 cents for the pot, and we're not damaging Mama's good stuff in the house, and we're not making it smell bad in the house. And I want to make it so it's all liquid. We pour it pretty good. The purpose of pouring the tar in, there's been a lot of different products. I found a lot of different products that have been used in coils over the years. I've seen people use silicones. I've seen people stuff it with styrofoam. I've seen them use the spray foams, the foam installations. And I wouldn't recommend using anything but tar. And for the simple reason that the tar, when it's poured in hot, is going to burn any moisture that's in your coil out. So we're getting rid of the moisture instantly, and then once it burns it out of there, it seals it from ever getting back in there again. If you use a silicone or the foam sprays or any of those kind of things, it will trap those moistures inside there forever, cause a corrosion. There can be corrosion that's caused, and your coil is just not probably going to last as long as if we've used the tar. And I think Ford was onto one of their better ideas here when they put the tar in the coil, because these coils have lasted 100 years now and have not gone away. So they've been well preserved in this tar, and that's where we're going to continue to use the tar. Our tar is melted down and we're ready to pour. It's probably right around 450 degrees. Important temperature is not important, just don't get it too hot. It really starts bellowing smoke and stuff if it's real hot. But we're at about the right temperature. It'll pour, and we just go ahead and re-pour it right over our new capacitor, and just refill that box. It'll take a few minutes here for it to set up. Our tar is set up. I can reinstall my door. I like to write on the inside of my door because it's a good clean place to write usually. The date that I replace the capacitor. And I just write in here cap and put in the date, whatever date it is. And the reason I do that is if I have to open that coil again, I know that I've been in it before. So it's not something that you have to do, it's just something that I do. So now I'm ready to install the door again. This one has a little crack in it, that's okay. We're just going to go ahead and slide it back on, just like it did originally. And once it's in place, then we're just going to take those little wire nails that we saved when we took the coil box apart, and I just put them right back in the same holes. They're not going to go anywhere. Take your little ball peen hammer, and just reseat the nails in the coil box. Now we've got it all finished up, as we're ready to make final adjustments on the coil, and we'll do that in the strobo spark. Put our coil inside our strobo spark. We've got all new tar, new capacitor, new points, and now we're just going to fine tune it and make some adjustments on it to make sure that we've got a good tuned coil. So we're just going to check our coil amps. Again, I'm just going to leave the magneto set on medium, and we'll see what we're putting out here. And we see we're putting out about 1.2 amps, which isn't too bad. Needle's bouncing around pretty good, but I'm seeing a double spark in the strobo spark, showing that there's a problem with our cushion spring adjustment on the coil itself. So we're going to make some adjustment to our cushion spring. We'll make some adjustment on the amperage, and we're going to smooth that needle out a little bit on the amperage there and make it a little more constant. So just some fine adjustments that we're going to make on the coil. Okay, earlier I mentioned on the coil that our cushion spring has to have free travel, and that can be a problem with the double spark if it isn't. Also, if we get a little bit too much tension on the front of the coil, on the front of the points, that'll cause that to bind up a little bit too. So when I mentioned that this should be about 32 thousandths or a 32nd of an inch clearance between the top point and the bottom point, it's not a super critical measurement. That's just a starting point with it, and then we'll adjust for smoothness on that. So the first thing I want to do is I want to get rid of our double spark. And I'm going to do that by simply removing the coil from the tester. I'm going to check my travel, and it seems I've got pretty good travel and pretty good tension on that spring, and it was just a slight double spark. It wasn't a horrible double spark. But to take that out, I'm going to take my little tool here that I got from Fun Projects, and I'm going to just pull up on it, place that on the bottom of the bridge there on the top points, and pull up on that and free that up just a little bit. The other thing that I'm going to do then is put it back in the tester and see what we did. You can see that cleared up the double spark just by moving that up just a little bit and taking some of the tension off of that spring. Now we've got 3 nice single sparks in our strobo spark. But now we're only putting out just slightly over 1 amp. We need to raise our amperage a little bit, and we do that by increasing the spring tension on the bottom point. And we're just going to lightly tap on the bottom of the points, increasing that tension, making it a little harder for the magnetism to pull that point down, and that uses more amperage, so that increases the amperage needed for the coil to properly work. So we're going to go back in here and see what we did, and actually that really cleaned up a couple of things. Now we've got a real steady needle on the amperage. It's not bouncing around too badly. We've got 3 good single sparks, and we're at exactly 1.3 amps. So we've really got this coil dialed in pretty well the way it sits right now. We don't get it quite as smooth as this one is, and it just takes a simple adjustment on the top. Just move it slightly one way or the other, and that'll smooth that needle out and smooth those amperages out a little bit by taking some of the tension off the front of the points. And that'll smooth things up just a little bit. So we've got this coil set, it's adjusted, and now the last thing to do on this coil is to go ahead and lock down our adjustment with the lock nut on the top of the coil. And I just take and run that down and take a socket and just tighten it against the other one so it doesn't change your adjustment. And now they're locked together, and our adjustment should maintain where we were at. We'll test it one more time. We're solid with 1.3 amps, a good steady needle, and 3 single sparks. I'd like to take a couple of seconds to explain increasing and decreasing the amperage on the coil, I talked about bending the back of it down to increase it, because it takes more energy then to pull the bottom point down. If you can actually get too much on there, and now you're putting out, you can pull up to 2 amps on it, and that'll burn up your coil or burn up your points if you're pulling up so much voltage or amperage. The easy way to adjust amperage back down then would be to just take a screwdriver and set it on the bottom point in front of the rivets and just give it a tap. Just tap it here with a hammer on the screwdriver. Don't clock it hard, and it'll bend that back down, relieving some of that tension and increasing the decreasing the amperage that required to pull those points down. The other thing that I wanted to mention, I used this tool here to free the tension on the cushion spring. You can do that also with your nut driver. It's a pretty simple thing to do. We can take the nut driver and just use the edge of the nut driver, and by applying a little bit of pressure, just roll your socket right over that a couple of times. You don't have to wrench on it very hard. It's brass. It doesn't take a lot of pressure, just some slight pressure on it, and roll that off, and that'll relieve some of that pressure from the points being bowed. By tightening this nut down and tightening this nut down, it wants to create a bow on everything, and you can roll that socket over there and free that up just a little bit. Things required less energy to adjust than what I initially thought. I used to take one of these adjusting tools and really crank on this thing, and I actually end up ruining the top set of points because I was putting too much pressure on them. And I've actually put so much pressure that I broke the little tang off of the tool. And you never need to put that much pressure. This is just a lesson I've learned the hard way and try to pass it on to you. When you're adjusting that cushion spring tension, it just takes ever so slight of a bend, and you just want to put a little bit of pressure on it and then remove it. Sometimes you can go too far the other way, and you can actually kind of see it when you're looking in there to see your free movement of that upper point. And you have to bring it back down the other way. But you don't need to necessarily, it's not like you're bending 2 pieces of sheet metal or a piece of sheet metal. You're just taking a slight tension off of things because of the bow. And the same thing when you're using this socket and rolling that over. It's just a light tension. It doesn't take a lot of push on that to make a change. And the same thing with adjusting this tension on the bottom. If you're taking that out, it's just a slight tap. And then if you're increasing the amperage, just a tap. It doesn't need to be, you don't need to pound that down. When you tap on it, it'll change, and you can test and adjust. Again, if you're thinking things are taking too long, slow down. You need to take the time to be patient with these things and make the adjustments proper, and you end up with a really nice coil that we just finished here a little while ago. All right, the last step, and this is the coil that we found was no good, but I'd sanded the box on it, cleaned it up. I'm going to go ahead and put some linseed oil on it just to show you how it cleans that box up, because that was a rough box when we started. We've lightly sanded it and got most of the crud off of it. And we just take some boiled linseed oil. You can get it at any of the hardware stores. A little can like this goes a long way. I do want to caution you that when using linseed oil, it has a very low flash point, and you can leave one of these oily rags sitting on a workbench or in a trash can somewhere, and it will spontaneous combust. Saturate the cloth, and then just rub it into the wood. Just hand rub it into the wood. And this wood is, like I say, it's 100 years old, and it hasn't been treated with anything probably ever. And it's brittle and it's hard. And by putting a little of this boiled linseed oil on, we're going to clean it up, clean the box. It'll take a lot of the dirt and stuff off, but that wood is going to soak it in. And It'll give the box a nice appearance, it'll clean it up, and it'll preserve it. After you get it on there, it makes the coil appear pretty nice.
Tootsie, goodbye. Tootsie, don't cry. The choo-choo train that takes me away from you. No words can tell how sad it makes me. Kiss me, Tootsie, and then